depending on where you are, good morning, good afternoon, or good night. It's a pleasure to welcome you here for our Eurostruct live talk. And first of all, I would like to compliment my esteemed guest today, Professor Michael Havbro Faber, and also my colleague Maria Pinali Mongelli, that will moderate this talk with me. Before starting, I want to make some information to you. The first one is that your camera should be off during the talk, and if you want to place any question to Professor Michael Faber, you can make it either through the chat for those that are in the Zoom platform, and either through Facebook for those that are assisting us on the Facebook. Those that are on the Zoom platform, when you place the question in the chat, if you can send the question directly to the Eurostruct Association account, that would be great, because we'll compile all your questions, and myself and Maria will be able to manage much better this way those questions. So I wish you in the next hour a very good moment with our guests, and that at the end we could have a more sustainable life all together, which is the most important at all. Thank you very much. And now I'm asking Maria to present our guest.
Thank you, Jose. Good afternoon to everybody. It's a real pleasure for me to introduce Professor Michael Faber. He's Professor of Risk-Informed Decision Support for Structures at the Department of Civil Engineering at Aalborg University in Denmark. He's leader of Structural Risks and Safety at the Danish Hydrocarbon Research and Technology Centre, and the head of Danish Centre for Risk and Safety Management. He has been head of the Department of Civil Engineering at DTU in Denmark, and tenured professor at TTH in Zurich in Switzerland. His research interests are directed on applied decision theory in engineering, with application in offshore, civil, naval, and aeronautical engineering, global risks, and management of natural hazards. He has also industrial experience, which mostly originates from COWI in Denmark, Det Norske Veritas in Norway, and Matrisk and North Consulting in Denmark. He's taken leadership in several international committees, the Joint Committee of Structural Safety, the World Economic Forum, Global Expert Network on Risk and Resilience. And he is research fellow of the Global Risk Forum in Davos, and member of the Danish Academy of Technical Sciences. And in 2019, he received the Cornell Award for his academic contributions to the fields of safety, resilience, and sustainability in pursuit of enhancing societal decision-making. Now, the floor is yours, Michael. He will present, his presentation will be about challenges and directions toward a sustainable built environment. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much to Professor Jose Matas also for taking the initiative to invite me. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to take a little bit of your time and talk about something which is close to my heart, namely sustainability in the built environment. It's rather hard to speak to an audience without being able to see anybody, and this is a challenge. And I also suppose that it's hard the other way around. So physical presence cannot be underestimated. But I will try my best. And I really look forward to having some discussions with you after my presentation. What I would like to talk about today is a little bit an introduction to the topic, setting the scene. Why does the built environment matter in the context of sustainability? And then I would like to talk about where are we right now? What is the situation? From that part, I would like to, in a very simple way and high level, I will talk about how to manage sustainability in the built environment, or even at more general scale, at strategic, operational, and technical levels. And then from that point on, I will address facilitators for sustainability in the built environment. And there are some to discuss. Of course, we cannot do it in much detail within the short time, but it will give you an idea of what I'm thinking about. And finally, I will introduce something which we have been working with for more than a year now, namely the Tongji consensus. And after that, I will close my presentation. So the built environment is actually one of the main building stones of society as we know it here in this little sketch. I have indicated how the development and the maintenance of the built environment, it contributes in a very substantial way to the system which we are living in and which provides us with our boundary conditions for developing welfare and civilization as we know it. The built environment has impacts, as indicated by these arrows on the environment, and we are also using natural resources actually quite a lot, and this is the issue here, in order to facilitate the development and maintenance of the built environment. It also takes some money, but it provides a basis for the production, and it also provides a very substantial input to what then supports life safety and health welfare. And of course, this is also a key issue when it comes to providing the human capital, which is us. So these are simple relationships. And the thing is that the boundary conditions for what we are doing for this system here, the boundary conditions, they are changing, and we are realizing that that we are feeling more and more the boundaries. So as the population on Earth is increasing, as we see it, there's getting less and less space for all of us, and we are using more and more the resources of the Earth system. And colleagues in Stockholm, in Sweden, they came up also with the concept of planetary boundaries to illustrate to what extent we are exploiting the capacities of the Earth system. And of course, this is still ongoing research, but on some of the key factors, quite a lot has already been done. And these people, natural scientists, they have come up with a scheme where we can see on the one side, what is the capacity to impact the environment, and also to what extent are we using this capacity, or are we overusing it already? We will come back to that a little bit later. But we also see these back couplings which exist between our activities and the Earth system as such, and we see that markedly through the climate change and their effects induced by human activities. And here, of course, CO2 emissions is a key issue. And it also is when we talk about sustainability of the built environment. I appreciate there are many aspects relating to sustainability of the built environment, and I might be focusing a little bit on the CO2 emission side. it's clear that what we are doing in our civilization and the built environment is contributing to this has impact on the same system which we are relying on for maintaining our existence on the Earth system. We don't exactly know to what extent our activities will have impact, but we have some models. We are not quite sure which of these models will be the relevant ones, but we will see in time, and we will have to adapt. And one of the key issues here is how can we avoid to get into one of the more serious scenarios. It's actually has become so bad with the impact of human activities on the Earth system that where we normally talk about the eras of the Earth system as the Pleistocene and the Holocene, and we were kind of waiting for what would the next era be named. It's now named the Anthropocene, where what really characterizes the Earth system are the impacts of human activity, and this is something to bear in mind. It is this severe, and here you see the well-known picture or graph illustrating the variation of the global temperature over time, and it's a logarithmic scale, and here within at the 0 point in the very right-hand side of the figure, we see the tremendous temperature rises just within basically no period of time. This is what we are dealing with. And we really need to do something. When we look at the population presently around 7.5 billion people, and this is increasing as we know. Just some numbers, I like to give a few numbers. Cities in the world with more than 1 million inhabitants, there are 500 or more of these. Bridges in just the United States of America, more than 600,000. And that's not counting the small ones. Then we have global road network, 13 million kilometers, and so on and so on. And this list is, of course, by far and large not complete. A lot more could be put. But just to indicate that we are talking, when we are talking about the built environment, we are talking about infrastructures of enormous dimensions, enormous amounts of material and activities, and the built environment also, of course, includes the buildings in which we are living and working. And you may appreciate that this is enormous. It actually, the construction sector, typically in the economy, contribute with around or more than 10% of GDP. So it's an important sector in society just from that perspective. It's also, and this is maybe on the darker side, responsible for more than 50% of the global energy consumption. And part of that energy is for building the buildings and the structures, and part of that is to heat and cool buildings during their operation. Structures in terms of embedded CO2 are responsible for a little more than 20% of global CO2 emissions. This is quite substantial, and concrete alone is responsible for something like 5, 6, 7, 8% of global CO2 emissions. Numbers vary a little depending on who is conducting the studies and what assumptions are made. It's also interesting to note that if we look at the material flow in society, then more than 90% of global material consumption takes place in the construction sector, if we measure in tons. Trends are, just to give some indication here, consumption in terms of cubic meter of concrete in China just over the last 2-3 years is equivalent to the consumption of concrete in the United States over the entire last century. And this is not because people are doing strange things in China. It's just a reflection on how development of welfare also leads to a stronger need for built environment. And China illustrates this, and there are other parts in the world who are going to follow in the next years. That's also reflected in the prediction that the global population is going to increase to around 10 billion by 2050. Here you also see an interesting graph showing, let's say, the relationship between population growth and use of material resources in terms of cement and steel. There's a study by McKinsey and co. Indicating that alone in the decade from 2020 to 2030, it's estimated that the total floor area is going to double at global scale. Now, this could even be considered to be a little bit scary, right? When it comes to political objectives, then of course you have all heard about the Paris Agreement, and in this context the European Union aim to cut CO2 emissions by 40% in 2030 and 80% in 2050 relative to 1990 levels. In this process, we don't really recognize where the construction industry is hidden when we look at how they add up the numbers and how they depict progress. And this is a little bit the problem with the construction sector, that it's not even clearly given, let's say, a common denominator in these considerations. So it's actually kind of split up between the different sectors which are addressed in these objectives. We can come back to that as well later. The sad fact is that with the present best practice technology, sustainable developments in the built environment actually necessitate that we really build as little as possible. And to get out of that corner, we need to develop radically new best practices in the construction sector. How to manage sustainability? Well, let me take basis in what we all can relate to, namely the household and the household challenge. So we are used to the concept of living in units as families, and we know what a family income is. We also can relate to family expenditures and even the various social dimensions of organizing, communicating, etc. within the family envelope. We also severely can relate to the situation that if we don't find the appropriate balance between income and expenditures, and especially if expenditures exceed income, then we fail. And this can be resembled by a loss of sustainability. If we overexploit our capacities, then we fail. And the capacity here in the household could resemble the household income. But we also know at family level how to manage, right? At strategic level, we actually talk about our long-term plans. What is it that we want to accomplish within the next 2, 5, 15 years? We also make budgets. Maybe we don't make 10-year budgets, but at least we have an idea on what could our monthly expenditures be. And that could be considered, let's say, management at operational level. But there's one extremely important element, and that becomes increasingly important the closer the expenditures get to the income, and that is that we do the bookkeeping, that we actually have some sort of control over to how far away we are from reaching our capacity, how far away we are from exceeding our income in our expenditures. And then whenever things change around us, we need to be able to adapt to reality, I name it. And that's decision making at tactical levels. Of course, there are always issues which are hard to relate to, totally unexpected things, and they represent risks. And we need to manage also these risks. And we do that by having unemployment insurance, sickness insurance. We have insurances in case of accidents and so on and so forth. And we also have the possibility to put a little bit of extra money on the bank account for a rainy day. We know these concepts. And then, of course, the social aspect, the communication, everything relating to establishing a common understanding of what we are doing and why we are doing it and what is happening. All these aspects are those aspects which we need to bring in into the picture when it concerns management of sustainability in the built environment. How, at more scientific level, this can be done? Well, I strongly propose that we pursue the idea of the planetary boundaries and this concept, because based on this concept, we can, in absolute numbers, in quantitative measures, we can assess the capacities of the Earth system, for instance, with respect to CO2 emissions. And we can, for instance, at local, national, and sector-wise, we can make strategic decisions on how much of these available capacities can we allocate to built environment, energy production, food production, transportation, and so on. And then when these budgets have been given, we can start to decide on where do we get the most welfare out of the available budgets, right? And of course, these considerations also have to be used at the highest level, as indicated in this slide here. We want to optimize our welfare with the available resources. The resources here are the capacities of the planetary system. And how can it be done? Well, it's actually already there. So any decision relating to the development and maintenance of the built environment, they will result in what in LCA terms is referred to as elementary flows. And we can break these elementary flows up into bits and pieces, such as CO2 emissions, ozone depletion, human toxicity, etc. And they can be categorized. And some of these impacts to the environment, they relate to the planetary boundary variables, for instance, CO2 emissions. And this knowledge, this information is of course associated with uncertainty. And there's no such thing as certainty associated with the absolute capacity of the Earth system. We have to take into account that we don't know everything, and data are maybe not sufficient, models are uncertain, etc. And the same concerns our assessment of how much we are loading these capacities, right? So our decision making will have to take into account in, let's say, similar ways as we are handling safety and reliability of structural systems. We can do the same type of approach when we are managing sustainability in absolute terms for the built environment. So we have here on the one side the LCA modeling and analysis of our impacts, and then we can model this uncertainty associated with the impacts and the capacities probabilistically. Simply just accounting for the uncertainties associated with our knowledge. That could be a basis. Facilitators, well, in the past, welfare, efficiency, especially when we talk about the built environment, are main focus for, let's say, societal demands and trends. And objectives of structural engineering have been centered around safety, reliability, and risk. And I believe that we have been aiming, and we have also achieved quite a lot in this respect. But this is not enough, and this is what we realize. So in the future, we are faced with globalization, significant population growth, urbanization, let's say, an increased need for the built environment. So issues like resilience and sustainability have come into the picture. We have realized that this is really tremendously important. And there are technological facilitators which I would like to point at, like cyber physical systems, big data, industry 4.0. And let's say a common denominator for what I want to say here is that we should use forefront technology really to collect more knowledge in a systematic way, such as to facilitate that instead of using materials, we can manage by use of information, so minimize on the material side and maximize on really optimizing use of information. This is one of the key vehicles to pursue for the future. On the side of organization, facilitators knowledge, education, and development of new knowledge through research, accountability in organizations, culture, like we have worked with risk culture over the last 20 or 30 years in organizations. We really need to focus now on sustainability culture, and then there needs to be incentives, at least in the beginning, until it runs by itself. In terms of regulatory facilitators, and this is one of my strong points, and I will come back to that, why I think that laws, standards, and design codes, regulatory elements, are tremendously important. And we cannot avoid to use these, at least strongly in the beginning. In terms of facilitators, many good people have done very good work in order to analyze and identify what matters to change the situation. I just want to put a little bit of focus on this report on a sustainable future for the European cement and concrete industry, already released in 2018 in November. So really pushing the agenda from the side of the concrete, let's say, industry and knowledge area. This is a very nice report. If you do not know it already, I advise you to have a look at it. They come up with some suggestions regarding different layers of stakeholders, like defining sustainable concrete, rewarding use of low carbon concrete, and limiting total demolition of structures via taxes and severe landfill regulations. Just as examples, I just want to point at a few examples. What's also interesting in this report is that some very absolute suggestions for absolute requirements are provided, like for structural engineers, structures should contain less than 250 kilo CO2 per square meter, or for construction companies, buildings containing less than 500 kilo CO2 per square meter. Things like that are things that we need in order to bring the focus in the design process on the right issues. Not only cost optimality or efficiency in terms of money and time, but really a strong focus, a totally integrated focus on sustainability. And that brings me towards the end of this presentation here. I just want to mention the Tongji consensus. It was initiated last year on June 1st in a workshop at Tongji University in Shanghai. We were a group of researchers who sat together for a day in order to discuss issues of sustainability in the built environment. And many good ideas and presentations and concerns came to the table. And at the end of the workshop, we wrote down what we then gave the name the Tongji Consensus. And it is a short document of a few pages which summarizes the situation, the need for a paradigm shift, and it points at facilitators and instruments to achieve a sustainable built environment. As an example, it's just an extract from the Tongi Consensus. One of the strong statements concerns nothing less but a worldwide transformative and united effort by all stakeholders of the construction sector is required for human society to be successful in sustainable developments and the mitigation of disastrous consequences of climate change at global and local scales. So this is a consensus, let's say, within a broad range of the stakeholders in the construction sector. Another extract, and this is a little bit related to my focus on codes. I think that these are tremendously important in order to trigger the right development in the built environment for the construction sector. There are so many stakeholders in the construction sector, going from carpenters to masonries to material producers of this and that sort, contractors, thousands or hundreds of thousands of contractors around the world, engineering companies, consulting owners. Everything is so diverse. There are so many individual entities that it's very, very difficult to get out of the money and time competition culture and into a more conscious focus on sustainability. And this is why I think design codes are tremendously important. And so one of the things we identified concerning design codes is that there's a strong need for open and transparent development of design codes based on the very best available knowledge, not the knowledge from 20 years ago. Continuous and timely consideration of regularly updated available information and data sources, holistically accounting for the mutual interactions between structural concepts, material choice, architecture, energy use, and indoor climate concepts and their respective impact on sustainability. So we need to be able to look holistically already when we are coming up with a structural design, explicitly addressing and accounting for the impacts of structures on the resilience of societies and infrastructure lifelines, and finally facilitating and rewarding the use of advanced analysis and methods of structural reliability, such as plastic analysis, probabilistic assessment of durability, site-specific assessment of environmental loads, and so on. Closure. Where do we go from now? Well, we need more subject matter knowledge among all stakeholders. And we need a new, as indicated earlier, a new paradigm, new appropriate best practices must be established on how to facilitate and ensure sustainable developments of the built environment. And we really need to join forces across all actors in the construction sector, including industry, authorities, academia and research laboratories, educational institutions, regulatory bodies, not least, NGOs, media, and so on. The Joint Committee on Structural Safety, together with the leading international engineering association standing behind what we also call the Liaison Committee, we strongly invite and encourage for collaboration. So let's meet together in this challenge for the future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Michael. It was a very interesting and topic that is on the day today. Before placing my first question, I would like to inform those that enter in between that please turn off your camera, the first thing, and that if you want to place questions to Michael, you can make it either if you are sitting on Facebook, putting your questions directly on the Facebook message, and if you are assisting on a Zoom, please put your questions on the chat of Zoom. It will be very welcome, these questions, and we will manage on a way to myself and Maria place the questions to Michael. So I think again the relevance of this topic we all know it's very, very important, and I'm going to make a first provocative question. Of course, we are living some new times or special times nowadays, and we see many photos of cities, places before and after COVID-19. And in many of these photos, we see that the production and the industry is getting very low, which puts in risk the economy of each country. But at the same time, in terms of sustainability, we have very good results. So people are moving from the cities to their houses out of the cities. We are using more digitalization than construction and full big production. So this is the reality today. My question to you is, should you use this time, since we are now fading out and going to the new normal, what I call the new normal, should we use this time to implement new measures, and what measures should be implemented in the first demand with respect to construction, in your opinion?
Well, you winding it all up into the COVID-19, and it brings me to the old point. I remember I was heavily engaged in post-disaster management after the Southeast Asia tsunami, I believe in 2004, where we, let's say, a bigger part of the world was hit by a quite severe disaster, and around 2,050,000 people died in that disastrous event. The COVID-19 has already exceeded that quite significantly, almost doubled by now. But one of the keywords which came out early on in the post-disaster management was to build back better, and this is a phrase which has been used continuously on disaster, post-disaster management, right? That we to build back better, and I think I severely think that now is a very, very good time to reconsider at more general scale, more fundamentally, whether we really want to go back to the new normal. And this is what everybody are pushing for, to get back to society exactly as it was by the end of 2019, or let's say in October 2019 worldwide. That's what we want to go back to. I'm not so sure. And I think it would be a very, very good opportunity really to take a closer look at what defines the new normal we want to go back to. And of course that also relates to what is it that we want to achieve with the built environment seen in that perspective. So is the development of infrastructure and the built environment in more general terms, does that have the same protection now as it had in October 2019? That is a very big question, and I think we can learn a lot. It appears that that many functions work very well without the ability to travel and meet all the colleagues in the office every day. It appears not to be entirely necessary, and there is some optimization which could have a significant impact for the built environment also.
Maybe I can ask the question, Jose?
Yes, Maria, please go ahead.
what do you think would be the major challenges to face in order to improve sustainability in the construction sector? You showed a lot of, well, you showed that the problem is huge, but where shall we start? And what are the main, the most difficult points to tackle in the specific construction sector?
Well, I think that a major difficulty is that when we talk about reductions of CO2 emissions, and when politicians are talking about it, they're talking about percentages. So we want to reduce by such a fraction by this time compared to our emissions at an earlier time. It's all fine, but we need to relate to, so in order to do the management, we need to relate to absolute terms. We need to have absolute numbers. Otherwise, we cannot do the bookkeeping. We need to relate to what is the budget that we have available, right? And that budget is not known with certainty. But we need to, we still need, just like in the household, we need to have an idea about what is the allowable use of the Earth system capacity for different types of impacts on the capacities of the Earth system. And then we need to define our regulations in such a way that the use of those capacities do not exceed what we assume that they are, right? So we need to get the machinery up for doing the bookkeeping. This is point number one. If you are not able to count the beans and you don't know what your budget is, you cannot manage anything. We can talk about it, but it's just fooling ourselves. We are navigating in the fog.
Michael.
Okay. Yes, okay. Go ahead.
You spoke a very, for me, I think is a very relevant topic, which is with respect with what happened next concerning the built environment. We have many people working from home now. We have many people moving to their houses out of the city. Do we have, or do we have the risk of having in the future some built buildings that could be at the end completely empty, and in our cities, because there are no workplace, people are working from home or people are not living, and what should we do in order? Should we simply demolish them, or is it any kind of possibility to make them reusing again them for the society?
Well, let's see what time will bring, right? I strongly anticipate, and I could say I fear that we will indeed go back to the old normal. So buildings will actually find, by far and large, their old purposes. But even if this is not the case, we have to appreciate in a much stronger degree that a building, a structure, is an asset. It's a commitment of resources, and it is there. And we should think twice, actually 3 times or 4 times, before we ever take down a building, instead of finding the appropriate use for the building. So don't build a new house, try to avoid it, try to use what has already been built, try to maintain it, really look at the life cycle assessment results. What what gives us the highest contribution to welfare with the minimum consumption of the Earth system capacities, CO2 emissions or other resources, right? We don't take down anything. We really try to avoid it. It's obvious. In the household, the first question you need to ask yourself if you're running low on resources, do we really need this, right? Can we use what we already have? This is just common sense, and we need to use common sense instead of letting the free market mechanisms define what turns out to be the lifetime of the built environment. We see way too often buildings being built, maybe a hotel in a city, and then after a while it turns out that a bank could see some, let's say, financial incitement in buying the hotel, demolishing it and building a new office building, simply because in terms of business it makes sense. But it's a resource that is being consumed, and up until now this is not really taken into account. This is totally not in the equation, and we need to embed it in the equation.
Maria.
Yes, I have, while we were talking about the similarity with COVID, I was thinking something, so it's a comment, but I would like to hear what you think about this. There is something that is very similar between sustainability and the COVID, which is the fact that the people are not really aware of, it seems at least, that they are not really aware of the risks related to these two events. It's not an extreme event like an earthquake that you can feel it. We couldn't feel the COVID, and we didn't do enough before it became really a problem. And it seems that we are doing the same with sustainability. Do you think that in this framework, risk, the way we communicate the risk is important, and we have to consider more simple people, but I mean citizens as the most important stakeholders, because you put them in the list of your presentation, there were many stakeholders, and maybe that the normal people, that actually make the household balance every day, they should be maybe considered more important, and so the communication on risk on behalf of the stakeholders should be more taken care. What do you think about this? What do you think about the importance of risk communication about sustainability? Are we doing enough or not?
I think communication is totally key here. Let's say the call for sustainable development has been made a long time ago in the Brundtland Commission, and since then, of course, there have been several important meetings in order to see if it's possible to join forces at the supranational level. But it's and as I said, it's I mean, it's 40 or 50 years ago, right, that all this started. But the real push now for politicians to take actions, it does not come from the politicians; it comes from the population.
Exactly.
And this is tremendously important. But it is also a difficult situation because politicians are sitting for 4 years, or if they're lucky, maybe for 2 periods, 8 years. And one of their main objectives is, of course, to fulfill the needs of the voters, of the citizens. in the most transparent way, in the most obvious way. So, like now we have the Paris Agreement, and I don't know, let's say, exactly what drives the let's say the political activities with respect to fulfillment of the Paris Agreement. Clearly, the voters want the fulfillment to take place. And I could also understand that the politicians want to show that they are actually fulfilling the Paris Agreement. But what we need to be careful of is that we are not just mingling with the bookkeeping until it looks like that now we are doing the right thing. What we really need to do is to make the real difference. So not just mingling around with numbers to make the equation go up, but we really need to make the long-term changes, which are essential. And we see in the case of the COVID pandemic that there's so much communication, and this is one of the, let's say, the key issues with a long, slowly propagating, evolving disaster. That is that the noise in terms of communication totally takes over reality. So it's impossible for politicians to know, it's impossible for the population to know in the end what is up and down. This is the benefit of something which happens really fast. You don't have time to think too much. You don't have time to debate who invented the virus, who is the climate change, is it man-made or is it actual natural? All such speculations are really just casting fog on the evolving disaster. And this is a key issue. And I think we can learn a lot from the COVID pandemic because there we see all the impacts of bad communication and noise, even fake news, you could call it. And the same, even more severely, has an effect on our disaster with respect to not having a sustainable development. It's super similar, and communication, yes, it's absolutely key. But my take to this is that we need to take this much more serious. So I'm sure that politicians are of course really good people, but they need to join up with subject matter experts in order to get the best possible advice. And I think in many cases they do that. But they also need to join up with media. So there needs to be some sort of collaboration between media and politicians and subject matter experts in order to keep things on the right track in these long-lasting crises, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. And when you say expert, I would say not only expert of sustainability, but also social expert, experts that know how to talk with people.
Yeah, subject matter experts for the problem, okay. And that's definitely multidimensional. I agree.
Michael, we have here a question. Considering that both demand and offer in construction is changing or changing with time, how can we keep the book that you mentioned? How can we keep that? Because there are these time changing permanently.
I didn't quite get the question. How can we do the bookkeeping? How can we? Yes,
the bookkeeping.
Yeah. Well, this is where I sincerely think that in Industry 4.0 is kind of key for this. We simply need to register what we are using in terms of resources. It's a normal thing. It's just that we have developed our society as if there were no limits to anything. And now we are facing the fact, yeah, well, there is probably an end to what we can do. and now it's time to start to count the beams. So we need to assess what do we already have in operation in terms of embedded CO2 when it concerns the built environment, and what are the impacts of making changes to develop further, to demolish, to maintain in different ways, to reorganize, and so on. And to this end, I think that the big IT service providers already have shown us the way, and they certainly have the technology. Whether the construction sector alone, with the present stakeholders in the construction sector, whether they can really take benefit of this technology, I'm not totally convinced. So I'm kind of suggesting that maybe we need companies like Google, like Amazon, Samsung, who knows who, on the playing ground in order to provide the technology which we need to be able to do the book counting. And it's not only the book counting, it's use of information, optimal use of information, where we can really take benefit from organizing the data we have regarding the built environment and how it's performing under different conditions. By getting this portfolio type of information into the management context of the built environment, we can learn a lot about what to do and what not to do, and we can maintain and develop the built environment much more efficiently and sustainable with this information. Right now, there's no such, let's say, large-scale information utilization at all, and this is a big fallacy of what we are doing in the built environment.
There is a question from the chat, which refers to slide 25. I don't have the presentation, so, but maybe you can, what is in the slide 25. It says, do you think that requirements like those shown in that slide should be included in the code? It is correct to design structures for expected 50 years of service life, as often happens today?
Is it correct that what?
To design structure for expected 50 years service life.
No, I think that the code requirements to service lives for structures is totally old-fashioned. I think that the philosophy behind what is in the design codes with respect to service lives, like 50 years or 100 years for some structures, these are just recommended, let's say, recommended values, but they are actually used in practice. And the philosophy when they were formulated was that well, we need to make sure that the structures are durable, that they will last until we want some new structures on the same locations, right? But we need to get around this old-fashioned perspective, and we need to see service lives as a means for optimization. So some structural components like foundations or pylons or caissons of larger bridges or things which could serve a purpose for a long time, that they have a long service life, right? They should have an adequately long duration before they deteriorate. And of course, they should be maintainable and repairable and all this. And then there could be other components of the structure where the service life could be shorter, and that concerns structural components which could be subject to change if it would be desired that the use of the structure, the use of the building would change over time. So this can be difficult to predict, and it's much better to be able to exchange some of the structural elements than to build a totally new structure. So the concept for putting together structural parts with different service lives should really look at let's say, some flexibility in the use of the structure over time, which can be quite difficult to predict. And then the last element of this interesting question, that concerns typically elements of the building envelope, which in a larger and larger degree are being comprised by high technology components for collecting energy or storing energy or getting rid of heat, so ventilation systems and things like these. And those part of the structures probably should have a relatively, if not very short lifetime, like maybe 10 years, because the renewal period for the technology which is involved is very short. And there's absolutely no need that the durability should be longer than the durability of the technology, because you would want to exchange the technology when a better technology is available. So we really need to see structural concepts in a much more holistic and flexible way. Decisions on these concepts have to be much more robust to changes in technology and use over time.
Michael, we have here two questions from the audience. The first one is, in view of the manifold stakeholders and interests involved in structural design processes, for example, from the material industry, how do you see our realistic chances for implementing substantial sustainability-driven changes to best current practices?
Yeah, this is, I mean, this is just flat down putting the dot above the I, right? So this is the key issue here. How can we make this change? And the a key bottleneck or key barrier here is that, of course, at the present time, the industry, if they're doing well, and most of them are, of course, doing well, otherwise they would not be in business, they don't like the prospect to see any change of the balances within competitiveness and market shares and all these aspects. And this is a big issue. This is a big problem for making any changes at all. I know that within the industry there are many really good people having the right visions, but when they look at their own companies or industries' prosperity, they of course they have to look at the market, and they are competing in the market, and without a change in the regulatory framework, they do not have the possibility to change course without the risk of losing their income. So a change in the regulatory boundary conditions is absolutely needed. There's no way around it. And then, of course, all the good ideas and the good people in the industry, they will be able to do the good things. But the regulatory boundary conditions they simply need to put the demand on the industry. Otherwise, they won't move. For sure, they will not move.
You see, for instance, that something like increasing the taxes for those contractors that are using specific materials which are not so sustainable, or not reusing existing buildings and so on. This could be a way to include in the future regulations in order to balance this activity.
Yeah, I think that let's say the consumption of, for instance, CO2 per square meter should be a competitive factor. So all these aspects have to be written into any contract. When there's a bid for projects, it should be defined building material. Just like, let's say, technical viability or quality, time and money, we need to put aspects of sustainability up on the top in those contractual documents.
Maria?
Then of course, then of course the incentives are there to do the right things, right? Okay.
Maria?
There is a question about the role of timber in the idea of changeable, flexible parts of the structure. Should we design structure thinking about their decommissioning?
For sure. So so the value chain in the built environment is very long, and we need to think about all the potentials we have in all individual links of the value chain on the one side. And of course, we also need to think in much more holistic terms when it comes to the circular economy concept, right? So when we make something, when we build something, we need to have a super clear idea, and that also needs to be regulated on how what we have built either gets recycled at a later point in time, and where the recycled material will actually end up. And not only recycling, we also need to think about reuse. So, for instance, if we are talking about timber components which after a demolition, reconstruction, deconstruction, if such structural elements are not subject to deterioration, then of course they need to be reused, right? We don't just throw away good construction materials, they need to be reused. But all this, of course, we need to find a totally new way of managing the material, these 90% measured in way of the total material loop at global scale, which we have in the construction sector. We need to get that under control, and we need to reuse, recycle. So there's a lot of focus on recycling. I'm not because I quantitatively know what would be the impact of reuse, but because very few people are talking about reuse of concrete walls or concrete beams or steel beams or whatever. I would like to advocate for reuse.
Michael, we have here a comment and then a question to you. As a comment, I have here from the audience, as an architect, I do know a book from the 70s, Newford. This describes dimensions of thousands of things and buildings related to humans, their body, and the need space to live in. It might be interesting to work on a such book, but then related to the planet instead of related to the human being. Just a thought. I don't know if you want to make any comment on this.
Related to what instead of the human being?
To the planet.
To the planet. Yes. Well, that sounds like that sounds like a good project. I could agree to that for sure. And
the second is a question that I want to correlate this also with the study that we made on cost action 1406. I tell a brief story. We made a survey with the operators of infrastructures all over the world, and I would say a very few percentage, or almost none of them, was using environment as a key performance indicator for their decision making. So this is the story in 2019. I hope in the future this will change. And in this design, exactly in this line, I want to put a question from the audience, which is, considering construction moves lots of money and has influence in political authorities, how do you foresee the possibility of changing the mindset against the own interests of those that need to do it?
Considering all the invested interests into the construction sector,
how considering that interest, how do you see the possibility of changing the mindset against the own interests of those that need to do it, construction? So those that need to build, those that need to operate, how do you see this changing in the mindset could be done against their own interests nowadays?
Well, again, I have to come back to the regulatory boundary conditions. I think it's super difficult just over, let's say, a sufficiently short time to change the mindset without giving the strong reason for why should we change the mindset. So there need to be a trigger, and I'm fully convinced that this trigger has to involve, of course, the various types of incentives, informations, distribution of knowledge, continuing education, all these things. But first and foremost, we need a change of the regulatory framework. Without this, it's not going to succeed. And I have to make the point that if the construction sector continues along the road which we are on now, and I consider myself to be part of it, if we continue to do business as we have done and are doing right now, there's no way, even if all the other sectors do what they're supposed to do according to the Paris Agreement, the Paris Agreement cannot be fulfilled objectives if we don't radically change the construction sector. And there are different ways how you can count the beans, and this is what people are doing now at national and European scale in order to see, are we reaching the objectives of the Paris Agreement? But the construction sector is typically counted as a sector which is not quota regulated. At least this is the case for Denmark. I believe this is a common characteristic. There are quota regulated sectors and there are non-quota regulated sectors. Like small enterprises and stuff like that, they are normally not considered to be quota regulated. And the construction industry, because of the many individual actors, is generally not considered to be quota regulated. But and this is fine. But the problem is that when you look at a sector and a part of it is quota, in a matter of fact quota regulated, because all the materials, they come from the quota regulated domain and they flow into the let's say the stakeholders, which are then actually building the buildings and maintaining the buildings which are not quota regulated. And then you do the bookkeeping as if we are only looking on the part which is not quota regulated. Then you kind of forget the contribution from the quota regulated CO2 emissions in this whole sector. And that makes things very, very confusing for politicians and for normal people. But the simple fact of the matter is that if we do not do something totally radical in the construction sector, then the construction sector alone will be responsible for the Earth's system capacity with respect to CO2 emissions will be strongly jeopardized.
If I may add a comment, I completely agree that the change of regulation would be a very strong lever to change the direction things are going. But I think another strong let's say incentive would be the market. I mean, if there is no one that buys a new building, they will stop building new buildings. So again, I think another very important component is the communication of risk to normal people, because if normal people stop buying stop supporting the construction of new buildings as a general thing, buildings, bridge, whatever, then the push will be strong toward the let's say, increasing the life of existing structures. And so there are two ways, impose through regulation and impose through the market. Of course, it's a longer path, but I think
you're totally right, but I think that there's a huge problem, let's say, taking the market-based approach. At least it doesn't work alone. For the simple reason that people actually do not know what it is that they are buying. So already here within the last 10 or 20 years, we have seen any variety of sustainable products. So you see sustainable banking, you see sustainable oil and gas exploitation, you see sustainable air travel. Everything is given the label, we do the green solution, or whenever you buy one of our products, we will plant a tree somewhere, right? And therefore the whatever product which is being sold is sustainable. How can people relate to that? How can they know what is up and down? We also see it in the construction sector with a large variety of different blue stamps of building concepts in order to promote sustainability. But that at global scale, it doesn't really help anything. Of course, you may increase, let's say, localized, and for those who have the money and the interest, you may be able to push sustainability. But here we are talking about the entire Earth's population. So how big a part of that population will actually have a direct connection or influence on the product that they're buying? How big a part of the population will have long-term, let's say, objectives with respect to sustainable development of the Earth system? I doubt that that will be very significant. We are talking about the developments in Asia, so still in China, a lot of things are going to take place in India, in Pakistan, and not forget the entire African continent. I don't believe that the market drive in the process of globalization and urbanization in those parts of the world, I really sincerely believe that the inclination would be to get as much space and functionality for the least amount of money, right, seen in the market. So we need, let's say, a higher level incentive, and regulations is the only way ahead.
Thank you very much. I don't know, Maria, if you want to put a last question.
There is a question from the audience. What are the actual possibilities in terms of technology development to take environmental issues in consideration?
They are very good. So we can always argue whether techniques and methods and tools, whether they are entirely perfect. But we have available approaches, methods, and tools to quantify the impact in a life cycle analysis context of the built environment. Under, for instance, in the Eurocode system, we have something called TC 250, which is concerned about, let's say, the classical aspects of design of structures, ensuring durability, ensuring reliability and safety in the built environment, and let's say also efficiency. in terms of economy and material use. But there is a parallel part of the CEN work and the Eurocode work, which is around TC 350, where they have developed a code text or technical documents which are describing in a code manner how to do the life cycle assessments relating to the development of the built environment. Now, what we need to do, but what is not being done presently, but what should be done is to bring TC 350 together with TC 250 and to integrate the LCA component into the normal structural design component of developing and maintaining the built environment. So we need to do that, and it's definitely possible. It's definitely possible.
Thank you, Michael. First of all, again, I want to congratulate for the Tongji consensus and for getting the consensus not only of those that were in Tongji on a moment, but all other strong associations related with the structural and civil engineering. I think it was very relevant, and I think this is the first and very important kickoff for a consensus with respect to standardization and implementing sustainability by the construction industry in practice. Once again, and it was very relevant, your discussion here today. I want to acknowledge you to be with us. I also would like to again acknowledge Maria for sharing with me this moderation, and also our associate partners, so Minho and Isis, for providing all platforms for developing these talks, and also to Boutique for all the design and the dissemination aspects. I also like to mention you some future conferences and talks that you are going to have. We have the FIB in Shanghai from 22 to 24 of November 2020. Then with respect to Eurostruct, next 4th of June at 2 p.m. Central European Summertime, we're going to have a talk with Nicolas Bardou, which is a director of Vinci Autoroute. Then we have on the 2nd to the 4th of September 2020, a training course that will be hybrid. Some part will be in Dublin and other parts online. And in 2021, the Eurostruct 2021 conference in Padua from 29 to 31 of August 2021. You have all this information concerning Eurostruct also in our website and also social media. And once again, I wish you a very good day or a very good night, depending on where you are. But together we think we are close, and we think globally. Thank you very much for everybody, and see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you too. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care.